2 weeks trapped in a cave. This is boring. I'm glad I was born in the 1980s and not caveman times. Cave people times.
What a predicament!
Well. Welcome to What a Predicament, a podcast that peers into the predicaments of the modern day and age. We're getting towards the end of Season 2 of What a Predicament, so it's time to tackle some of the things I've been putting off, tie up some loose ends, or should I say, knots? Specifically, proposing to my lovely girlfriend. But why get married? What does it even mean? We've been together a few years now and never needed to register our relationship with the state. What have they got to do with it? I always thought it was common sense to never sign a contract without reading it. So today on the podcast, I want to find out what it is you're actually agreeing to when you sign on the dotted line. Now, as much as I can't afford to any further fracture my few followers, heads up, I'm really only going to be selfishly looking at marriage as it pertains to New Zealand law. But what is marriage? The very first marriages were a way of meeting old-timey people's need to create a safe space in which they could breed unimpeded and formally declare their heirs. And for most of Western history, marriage was a private contract between families. Around 5 AD, Christian theologians first mentioned marriage in their missives, which is when the Christian church pricked up their ears at the idea of a formal ceremony and got their institution involved. If 2 people told the church they'd exchanged vows, the church took them at face value, and it was official. Nowadays, there's a lot more paperwork. It's the government that authorises conscious couplings in the form of a marriage licence. I can't make heads nor tails of this particular predicament, so I sat down with Tess Porter, Remuera branch manager at the Citizens Advice Bureau, to get the legal lowdown. So, firstly, what has to happen to become legally married? Is it just signing a piece of paper?
Okay, you've got 2 options in New Zealand. You've got marriage and you've got civil union. And in both cases, you have to apply for a licence in advance. And you get that licence granted through Internal Affairs. And then that requires you to have a ceremony within 3 months and get a certificate. And at that point, you become legally married or in a civil union.
When you say legally married, what is legally married? What's the difference between being married and just living together and doing all the same things you did de facto?
Okay, so de facto is a different type of relationship which has also got some legal recognition in New Zealand. But in terms of marriage, to be legally married, once you've got that marriage certificate, you have obligations then under the Relationship Properties Act, and that is the major legal obligation that in terms of how you and your spouse support each other and what happens if the relationship ends. Whereas a de facto is much less formal. You don't have to have a plan going in. You don't have to have a licence for a de facto relationship. There's no formal start or finish. But a marriage, there is a formal start to the marriage relationship, and there has to be a formal end, or we call it a dissolution as well. So those are the major differences there.
You'd mentioned this property relationship thing. What is there any brief bullet points you could summarise some of the things that being legally married entitles you to, and maybe what your obligations are?
Okay, well, at the Citizens Advice Bureau, we often get questions about this when the relationship is breaking down, and we do see the Property Relationships Act coming into it there, because if you are in a marriage or civil union relationship, you are subject to the Property Relationships Act immediately. If you're in a de facto relationship, you become subject to that after a period of time, and the standard duration in New Zealand is 3 years, or if you have a child in that relationship. And at that point, the Property Relationship Act determines how your mutual property is dealt with in the event of a relationship breakup. You can through some legal mechanisms, protect your existing property before going into a relationship, and you can have what used to be called a prenuptial agreement, which sets out how any mutually acquired or pre-existing property will be dealt with. The documents now are called a contracting out document or an equal split document, and you will need a lawyer to do that. Whereas if you are not covered by one of those documents, there is a standard we start with a 50-50 split and we work from there depending on the circumstances. So those are all factors that have to be taken into account, particularly if you've got property before you go into the relationship. Marriage formalises things. It clarifies things for a lot of people. The decision to get either married or enter a civil union is a very personal one. Those two states are roughly equivalent under the law, but they are very different for people emotionally. So that decision as to whether or not to get married or to go into a civil union doesn't impact so much on things like property and income legislation, all that sort of stuff, but it does impact on people, how people feel about the relationship. So yeah, it's a personal thing.
Yeah, it was just because the only reason I bring it up, which is kind of the purpose of this episode, was thinking if marriage is a legal document or a legal agreement, I'm sure, say you are signing a contract for a new job, you wouldn't sign that contract without reading it and understanding everything. So that's what it was trying to do, is spell out for people, what are you actually agreeing to? And it sounds like it's...
Yeah,
there's a lot of
absolutely.
arms to it, but it's largely to do with how property is shared amongst the...
Yeah, it is. It's an agreement. A marriage is an agreement to share a life, and that's however you formalise it through marriage, civil union, or de facto. You are choosing to share your life with somebody, and there are obligations that come with that I think for any relationship you need to be clear about. But there are some legal things in law about which you're right, people do, if they're contemplating this, they really should do a little bit of research. And it might be different from what their parents understand a marriage to be. It may be different from, if they are new to New Zealand, it may be different from what they are anticipating it being, because family law is one area that does change from nation to nation. So those are things they should research. They should look into it and say, actually, what does it mean to be legally married? Is this what I think it means? And is it going to work for me? Yes, so we do have options within New Zealand, but they are similar under the law, but they're not exactly the same.
When you say do some research, where would you recommend people go for that sort of information?
Okay, if they've got a specific question about their own circumstances and am I legally liable for something, they can contact the Citizens Advice Bureau for that. There is quite a lot of information online. You have to, when you are looking up online, you do have to be careful you're actually getting New Zealand websites. But the New Zealand government, so www.gov.nz, if you look in there under the internal affairs side, family relationships or family law, you will find references to the Marriage Act, which is still current in terms of who can get married, and the basic process. Of course, in New Zealand, that also now applies to same-sex couples and civil unions. So I'm just looking at a reference here from the Community Law, which is communitylaw.org.nz. They have an excellent, plain, readable English resource here on who can get married, how do you get married, how do you end a marriage, what that means in terms of the time limitations and information like that, and also a bit of information there about de facto relationships and what legal rights and obligations they confer as well. So those are two sites which basically will give you the outline of what being married means and what you're entering into, because you're right, it is a legal arrangement.
And a more fun one to wrap up. I know apparently when you sign the contract, it's a situation where you're allowed to change your name without going through deed poll. I guess the implication is you'd take your partner's name or vice versa, or some sort of hybrid. But is there some leeway where you could just change your name to anything you like?
Yes, when you get married, you don't have to do anything special if you wish to change your surname after either entering in a marriage or a civil union. You have the straightforward options. You can keep your own name. that you were born with. You can take your partner's surname, or you can hyphenate or use a combination of both your last names. And generally, officially, you don't have to go through any particular process once you've got the marriage certificate, but you will probably have to provide the marriage certificate to various organisations if you need to change, for example, your driver's licence. And if you're using your driver's licence for ID, then you probably do need to get it changed. Now that you've got 10-year passports, your passport may be in your old name and you may be wanting to travel under your new name. And I think in that case, I don't know off the top of my head what the answer is. You probably need to take a copy of your marriage certificate or something like that. I think that would be a good thing to clarify. If you want to come up with some completely new made-up name, you still have to go through the process of getting a statutory declaration and registering that as a new name. So that the standard options are only to do with your surname, your partner's surname, or a combination of both. Those are the standard options.
That's a good one, actually, because as I said, I was trying to examine what are the actual benefits you get when you sign the contract. Like, what would be the incentive for someone to sign the contract, and the fact that you can legally take your partner's name without, and it's this document is legal proof that I am family with this person is quite a good benefit. So is there any final advice based on the sort of things that people come to you with that people should know or take into consideration or think about when they're deciding what they want to do in terms of a relationship status?
I think it is still a very personal decision. Relationships evolve in so many individual ways. Marriage, civil union and de facto are all legally recognised options within New Zealand, and they will each have their own attractions for different people. You need to be, like anything with relationships, you need to be talking to your partner or your prospective partner about this, because it is a legal status, particularly if you enter into a marriage or civil union, which takes some getting out of if it goes wrong. So my recommendation, particularly with those two options, would be to look at the options first and discuss it and come up with something that suits you both. De facto, if you are in a relationship that has been for any length of time, going for any length of time, or you're cohabiting, you may well now be legally defined as in a de facto relationship, and it might pay for you to actually figure out what that means.
Beautiful. Any other more off the cuff or less related to your role at the Citizens Advice Bureau, but I did spy a ring on your finger. Any just general marriage advice? Oh,
yeah. I was wondering if you're going to ask that, because when you contacted us to say I'm doing this social media and was asking questions, I did try to talk to some of my younger, more technically savvy people and try and get them to come in and be your interviewee. But none of them volunteered, so you've got me. And yeah, I am married. I've been married for 18 years, and I can say it takes work. But, it works for us. And I think it's an incredibly individual thing, and no two marriages are the same. And everybody has to come to these decisions. I mean, it's an adult thing. You have to come to this decision by yourself. Don't get pressured into it by other people.
After speaking to Tess, I found that there were a few benefits to this whole holy matrimony racket. Being married means you automatically obtain next of kin rights. You're able to adopt children together. Not to mention, albeit while actually mentioning, the numerous studies that say that on average married couples live longer and make more money. Surely though, the reason most people willingly want wedlock is not to get the right to visit their partner in hospital or adopt. There must be some X factor that drives people to get hitched. And say I want a taste of that X factor. What's the next step? Am I supposed to buy a ring? The diamond dilemma is a whole What a Predicament episode in itself. But you must have heard about the arbitrary value people place on various rocks. The idea that diamonds are valuable because they're rare was true, up until huge deposits were uncovered in the 1800s. Diamond suppliers then had a choice. Face a massive devaluation of their product, or band together to form a veritable cartel, monopolizing diamonds and fixing prices. Guess which one they picked? The De Beers Corporation eventually had to plead guilty to price fixing in 2004, but that's not even touching on the rampant child slavery in the diamond industry. Look it up. You try explaining that to an expectant girlfriend, though. The thing is, diamonds are a scam. That's why I didn't get you the ring you've been told since birth to expect. In my own circumstance, I managed to compromise. My mum told me I could have her old engagement ring to propose with, so that way I didn't have to spend money to prop up a brutal African warlord. Instead, I got to support a local business by getting mum's old ring resized instead. No more child slaves had to die than the ones who already had, and far be it for me to let their sacrifice be in vain. So the ring's sorted, but how to propose? I thought I'd check in with my peers, so I called upon my married Kiwi co-workers to get their stories about when they knew it was time, how they did it, and what I can expect with the rest of my life.
Well, you know, when you're living together, I suppose it's getting pretty serious at that point, and you sort of half know, but also the hints get dropped as well. So, particularly for the guy, there's usually some pretty obvious hints, and you sort of know at that point that it's coming, it's in the pipeline.
The kids were sort of getting at an age where they'd be useful at a wedding, so it seemed an appropriate time to propose.
Yeah, we've got a picture hanging on our wall of it's an old sort of illustration of Waikiki Beach. In the background, it's got the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, the big old pink hotel. And so we went to Hawaii for a week, and I proposed to her outside the hotel on the back lawn. I thought it'd be nice that, you know, when we got home, from then on, we'd look at that picture, and it would be kind of special because it would remind us of the night we got engaged.
We were actually up a hill overlooking the sea, so yeah, it was quite a sort of special place where we used to go quite often, and you know, look out over the harbour.
Oh, it was pretty impromptu. We were walking down the main street of Hastings and happened to wander past a jewellery shop, and my wife said, "That's a very nice ring," and I thought, yes. So I went in and bought it, and then we went to lunch. She didn't realise I bought it, and just dropped down on one knee in the middle of the of the bar that we went to and proposed there.
Any advice about marriage? Don't do it.
Don't try and get away with anything. She'll always find out. Always. No matter how little.
Expect the unexpected. All sorts of things will come along that you're not expecting. But, yeah, if you're with the right person.
The only advice I'd give a married man is be patient.
The old saying is the happy wife, happy life, and it sounds silly, but it is actually really true. If your wife is unhappy, then your life is going to be unhappy as well.
You might think the whole sort of, the whole ceremony and the party afterwards means a lot, but, you know, sort of 12 months later, it's, yeah. Why do we get so worked up about that?
Anyone who listened to the previous episode of this podcast would have heard me try stand-up comedy for the first time. And while that was a one-off thing, if I did do it again, it would be nice to have some my wife material. But if I want to have the world's first proposal via podcast, how do I get good audio? The best quality would be to get her in the studio, but I don't want to give the game away. That's it. We're taking part in HP 48 Hours, a filmmaking challenge where competitors have a weekend to write, shoot, and edit a short film with all the criteria they give you on the Friday night. So I could tell her I'm doing an episode about that process and get her to come in and answer a few filmmaking questions before hitting her with the biggest question of all. What a flawless plan. What could make a better foundation on which to build a life together than deceit and subterfuge? So what's your previous involvement in the 48-Hour Film Festival?
Oh, I've just been in one before. I was an actress, and I just appeared looking for my lost cat. So I was a crazy cat lady, which was pretty fun. But I snapped the little board thingy. What's that called?
Like a clapper?
Yeah, I snapped one of those. As you can probably guess, I'm haven't really been involved in film before, but I just decided to give it a go this year.
Now, this year you were taking the role of a producer, and as a producer, you've got the power to pull in whoever you want. So what do you look for in someone you want in the team, and what do you think that the people we've got together can bring to the table that maybe other teams can't?
Well, I just looked for people who are go-getters, pretty much. People who are yes people. I think that's really, really important.
As long as you're...
I'll just fast forward through this part. She just goes on about diversity and female representation in film for a bit. I'll just cut to the chase.
So I think like the trend is hard-hitting emotional films and something memorable. Yeah.
Cool. And speaking of hard-hitting and emotional, do you want to get married? Now, if it'll help sweeten the deal, I have some truffles and a bottle of champagne with gold in it, if you're so inclined.
I mean, I just had whiskey, so I don't know if I'm like tripping out or like... What? No way. What? Oh my god. Whoa. Yeah. I can't even breathe. Yes.
Hey.
Oh my god. No, I can't. What? Oh my god, baby. Thank you. I don't know what finger this goes on.
I don't either. I think... Phew, that was lucky.
Oh my god.
After a quick toast, I had some follow-up questions. Does it taste like gold?
It tastes delicious. I'm not really sure what gold tastes like.
Now you know. So, how relevant do you feel marriage is in 2017?
Well, in the legal sense, I think it's dead because of many reasons, one of which, gay marriage isn't a thing across all cultures yet, and it's just ridiculous. I think it's just, why do you need to tie yourself up in legal bull?
Get the government involved in your personal life?
Yeah, that seems ridiculous, but just as a promise and a ceremony, I think it's still relevant because it's a big thing to say that you want to spend the rest of your life with someone.
I didn't realise that was part of it. Ugh.
So it's a huge thing. So yeah, I think it's definitely relevant in the promise sense and not the legal sense. So
Just like culturally, it's kind of an expectation or a milestone that...
I think so.
Yeah, because despite your reservations, you entered into that contract pretty quickly. Pretty quick to say, well, you weren't that quick to say yes, actually.
It's been, 6 years, 2 months and 14 days or something? Something like that. And I'm very, 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 very happy that it's finally happened.
So do you think marriage would change our relationship?
I don't think so. I think... What was the question again? I think you really need to find someone who lights a fire under your butt. Really, I think we kind of feed off each other in terms of pushing to fulfill our creative desires. So when I see you writing and doing your podcast, I really want to get out there and do my acting and writing my music. I can't sit still while you're busy doing something. So I think it works the other way as well.
It's not just someone you're comfortable with, but someone that, motivates you as well.
I think having some mutual interests definitely helps. Like, we'd like the same music, we appreciate the same things in film, and that makes for a great long-lasting relationship. And also, I guess we have the same political views as well, and we have good debates, even though we don't see eye to eye on every single little thing. Otherwise, that'll be quite boring if we were just the same person. We're still, it's every day is exciting.
So this is what being engaged feels like. Kind of the same, except now my fiance's crying with, presumably that's joy? Thanks for listening to this very special episode of What a Predicament. Thanks to Tess from the Citizens Advice Bureau, Kiwis can hit up the knowledgeable volunteers at the CAB for free legal information and support. Thanks also to Scott, John, and Ian from work for their sage spousal advice. Thanks to Marissa for agreeing to be my wife. For 19 episodes now, the opening theme music for What a Predicament has been a derivative of The Little Hotel of Horrors by Decamentarium, licensed under Creative Commons Attribution 4.0. This track here is Phil by Cy Hart, the first of my childhood friends to get married. It only took me like a decade to catch up. Catch up with more What a Predicament stuff over at facebook.com/whatapredicament or the official Whatacat Productions website, whatacat.co.nz. Oh, nice. The weather's cleared up. I can see clearly now the rain is gone. I can finally leave this cave and go back to the home I cohabit with my future wife. Speaking of cohabiting, perhaps I'm not alone in this cave. What the? It's a dinosaur? That's what they actually look like. Huh. All the paleontologists were wrong. Take that, science. Score 1 for anecdotal evidence. Unless I can outrun one of the most infamous predators of all time, I'm mincemeat. If I miraculously make it out alive, I'll be back in a couple of weeks to give another problem the old What a Predicament treatment.